What is up everyone, it's Saber here and welcome to another Naruto What If. If you end up liking the video, please consider subscribing. It's free and you can take it back at any time and it really helps me out, and this is my third channel, so if you want some more what ifs, go check out my other channels. And with all of the YouTube formalities out of the way, let's get into it. Today was the day. It had taken Naruto over a week, lots of work with shadow clones and many deflated rubber balls, but now he had it in the same rocky terrain that they'd started in. Naruto stood before his sensei, who looked on silently with his hands in his pockets. He was glaring down at a white rubber ball in his hand. He closed his eyes, breathing in deeply, then with a growl he channeled a surge of chakra into the ball, rotating the chakra within. He watched the ball distort until finally pop. The ball exploded, sending out a burst of wind that ruffled his hair. As its pieces fell to the ground, he turned and grinned at Kakashi before raising a fist in the air in triumph. Alright, he then made a V with his fingers. Told you I had it. Very good, his sensei said with a nod. It's time you move on to the final step. Naruto grinned. Lay it on me, Kakashi sensei, I'll get it down in no time. Just one more step and he'd not only add a super awesome jutsu to his arsenal, but a technique left by his father. I wouldn't be too sure this step's the hardest of all. Kakashi warned the silver-haired Jonin, then reached into his pouch and pulled out a scroll. Naruto looked on in anticipation as his sensei used the unsealing technique. In a burst of smoke, his final test lay before him. Naruto blinked. More balloons? Yep. Kakashi nodded as he picked one up. He then gestured for Naruto to approach. Can't throw these. Naruto soon saw why. It was an ordinary balloon, filled with air. Care to guess what the aim is this time? It's a bit different than the other steps. Naruto frowned as he thought back to Kakashi's explanation of their training. The answer quickly came to him. Oh, I get it this time. I need to keep from popping the balloon. Kakashi I smiled. Right, take all that you learned from the last two steps and keep it all contained within that flimsy balloon and you'll have it. Naruto nodded and then concentrated on the balloon in his hand, determination clear on his features. This was at the final step. All he had to do was keep this balloon from bursting. Easy, right? He had this. He formed an orb of chakra within the balloon. It exploded almost immediately. Sakura knocked on the door before her and waited, putting her hands behind her back. Be right there. She soon heard a familiar voice say. The door opened to reveal Naruto, who grinned. Hey Sakura, good to see you. Sakura, glad you made it. She heard Fu call from her place at Naruto's table. She saw the green-haired girl raise a bag. I brought snacks. Well, I see someone got here early, Sakura noted with a smirk. So are we just waiting on Sasuke? Yep, knowing him he should be here any minute, Naruto said as she stepped inside. Oh, she muttered as something occurred to her. Fu, what kind of snacks did you bring? She asked, afraid she already knew the answer. Fu smiled, closing her eyes. Some sweets from Gekoyam. They make some of the best mochi I've ever had. She and Naruto looked at each other. Oh boy, she muttered before looking at Fu, who looked at her curiously. Sasuke hates sweet things. Fu's face fell. She looked at her bag in disappointment. Oh damn it. Naruto waved off her concerns. Don't worry, we'll still enjoy them, and I'm sure I've got something around here he can snack on if he wants. Well, I'll take some, Sakura said as she joined Fu at the table. The mint-haired girl smiled as she held the bag to her. You like that place, huh? Hope I'm not going to regret showing it to you, huh? Fu blinked before she seemed to get what she meant. This is the first time I've been back there since you showed it to me. Can't pig out on sweets every day, you know, unless you're in a kimchi, Sakura replied jokingly as she took out a package of dango. Fu blinked. You mean like Choji? She giggled. Well, he was the only one snacking during the prelims. Sakura didn't get why Fu's team seemed to shun her. Sure, she could see how all the other girls' energy could get annoying at times, but she was a good sort. Fu had spent more time with Naruto, no surprise there. The exuberant pair got on like a house on fire, but she and Sakura had hung out a few times over the past few days. Fu seemed to be able to find a way to make just about anything fun, and she was surprisingly good at just about any type of game, and yet it seemed she wasn't well liked back in Taki when your brother's the leader of your village and yet is pretty much your only friend. Ouch, it reminded her of her early days in the academy before Ino, back when she spent most of her time crying because the other kids made fun of her forehead. No one was willing to even talk to her aside from her parents, either because they made fun of her too or they were afraid of making themselves a target. Well, Naruto tried. Sakura felt a bit ashamed about how she'd responded now that she'd thought about it seriously. Why did he have a crush on her? It was part of why she wanted to be Fu's friend like Ino had been for her, even if they wouldn't be able to keep in touch. Guys, Fu began getting their attention. She looked a bit uncertain, her orange eyes looking to the ground before looking back at them. Is there a reason Sasuke's so distant? I mean, I get that he still doesn't know me that well, but he doesn't seem to talk much to anyone besides you guys. Naruto and Sakura shared a troubled look. Fu quickly picked up on that. Bad, never mind then, forget I said anything. Naruto sighed, rubbing the back of his head. It's pretty hard to get him to open up. He's the type that doesn't really care for idle chit-chat. You No, he can come off as cold, but he's a good guy. Beneath that Fu nodded. I can tell you guys seem really close. She then scratched her cheek. I wish I had a team like yours. Sakura smiled briefly, reminiscing how their team had started out. I remember Sasuke used to be a lot more open. She began thinking back further, but then she trailed off and shook her head. Then I came home to find my entire clan dead, Sasuke said, startling all three of them, and drowning out the sound of the door creaking open. They all turned to see him standing at the now open door. What? Fu blanched, her face paling as she seemed to shrink into herself as Sasuke walked into the room, joining them near the table. Oh God, that's her mouth worked for a moment, unable to find the words before her wide eyes fell to the table. I knew you were the last Uchiha, but I never heard how that. I thought the clan just dwindled over the years. We own an entire district, the Uchiha informed her, looking at her, and then out the window it was almost its own village inside Konoha. And then in one night he trailed off, not seeming to look at anything as his eyes stared out at the village, his hand clenched at his side. She could see emotions warring within him as he stared out, the tensing, the furrowed brow, the unseeing look in his eyes, sorrow, loss, anger. Sasuke. Sakura looked toward him with concern, a single hand raised to her chest. She still had trouble wrapping her mind around that. It didn't help that no one ever told them who did it. The adults probably knew, but they never told the kids, and no one was about to ask Sasuke about it. Fu looked at him in horror, her eyes wide and mouth agape before her gaze trailed down, her hair covering her eyes. The mint-haired girl was probably trying to put herself in his shoes. Sakura knew she had imagining coming home to find just her parents like that. It had really made her appreciate them more. Naruto looked pained while Sakura continued, staring at the other boy with concern, neither sure of what to say. This was the first time Sasuke had actually talked about that night. Fu looked up, a slight watery shine in her eyes as she looked sadly at Sasuke. A few seconds of silence passed before the Uchiha of all people broke it. So weren't we going to play cards? Seeing the effort to get them past that gloomy subject for what it was, Fu sat back, shook her head to clear it, wiped her eyes, and nodded. Yeah, I've got the cards right here. Fu pulled out a deck of cards from her pouch. She then looked apologetic as she placed it on the table. Sorry, I brought snacks, but no one told me you didn't like sweets. Sasuke shook his head. Don't worry about it, he replied as he sat down at the table. The other two members of Team 7 joined him. Naruto gave Fu a slight smile as he said, Fu, why don't you shuffle? He then winked at her. The mint-haired Kunoichi seemed to get it and smiled, and then she turned her attention to the cards in her hand. Sakura blinked as she watched the Taki Kunoichi work. The cards just seemed to flow and glide between her hands. They flew in twin streams between her hands with a flourish before she had the cards dance between her fingers. Whoa, Sakura breathed, and she knew she wasn't the only one impressed. Naruto grinned as he watched, clearly having seen it before. For a few moments they watched the Taki Kunoichi seamlessly shift the cards through flourishes. The girl's orange eyes gleamed at how they enjoyed her work, clearly happy to entertain and lighten the mood. Sasuke. Naruto spoke up, getting the Uchiha's attention. I'm not going to say I understand what you've been through, but Sakura and I have your back. Yeah, Sakura nodded with a soft smile. We're here for you if you need it. Me too, Fu added as she placed the cards on the table. She looked at Sasuke sadly. I know what it's like to lose someone you love, but that I know I won't be here long. But whenever I'm around you can count on me. Sasuke closed his eyes, but Sakura got the feeling he appreciated the offer. They never told us anything about who did it. Did we ever catch them? Sakura asked. No, he's still out there, Sasuke replied, looking out the window with a frown. He did? Sasuke. No, who was responsible? Wait, he was there that night. He just said it was already over by the time he got home, but did he actually see the culprit? So he's the guy you've been after, Naruto noted. When the time comes, Sakura, and I'll have your back. Sakura nodded, her brow furrowed. Same here. If you ever track this guy down, just say the word and I'll come running, Fu said with a nod. Then she rubbed the back of her head with a sheepish smile. If you can get word to me, I mean right. Taki was a hidden village. After a moment he looked at the other three and just said thanks. Another period of silence passed before Sakura spoke up. So does anyone have any idea what we're playing? She'd been invited for cards, not a specific game. She didn't really have any preference. Sasuke shrugged while Naruto cupped his chin and thought. Fu meanwhile beamed. If no one else has any ideas, I've got one. After a moment, without any objections, Naruto said, okay, go for it. Fu beamed before she began dealing out cards. Alright guys, the name of the game's Hearts. Kakashi made his way through the halls of Konoha's administration building. He greeted the few who crossed his path with a nod as he made his way to the Hokage's office. The silver-haired man had been sitting back with his book after spending the day training his students. Before getting to work improving his own skills, there was always room to grow after all, and he wasn't going to delude himself into believing he was a match for one of the Sannin who knew what resources Orochimaru could have at his disposal, what he had planned, or how insistently he'd pursue his student. After placing that damn cursed seal on him, the copy ninja would do his damnedest to be ready to protect his students and the village. Then out of the blue an ANBU member had appeared at his door and told him the Hokage wished to see him. That was one thing he would never be late for. He knocked on the door. Upon reaching his destination come and he heard from within. He opened the door and stepped inside. "You wish to see me, Lord Hokage?" Kakashi asked as he walked halfway to his leader's desk. The third Hokage sat at the table with his fingers steepled together. He nodded. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "A formality. It wasn't like anyone could refuse. It was no trouble. Now, if I may ask, why have I been called here?" Hiruzen closed his eyes. "Someone wanted to speak with you and I wanted to sit in on this discussion." Kakashi frowned as he wondered who the Hokage could be talking about. It was then that a chuckle reached his ears. Someone else was in the room, someone he hadn't even sensed. For an instant he tensed, but he relaxed again almost immediately. This was a voice he knew, though one he hadn't heard in many years. He turned wide-eyed to see a tall white-haired man leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, smirking at him. "Hey Kakashi, been a while." Jiraiya, Kakashi said, a hint of surprise in his tone. Jiraiya of the Sannin, one of the legendary students of the third Hokage, the sensei of his sensei, one of the strongest shinobi alive, and the author of his favorite book series. "I didn't know you'd returned." "Head good then, I'm not losing my touch," Jiraiya mused, cupping his chin. He then lost his smirk, looking at Kakashi with a slight frown. "I can't imagine things were easy for you after the Kyuubi attack. You doing okay?" Kakashi shrugged. "As well as can be expected," he replied, getting a hum from the man. "But I take it you're not here to talk about me." "The old man told me about the Uchiha brat's new tattoo. Is your team alright? Has he shown any signs of trouble?" Jiraiya inquired. "Thankfully no, and my team is doing quite well," Kakashi replied. "They had a rough start, but I'm glad to say they're far more functional than either of ours were, especially so early on. But then hardship and trauma can do that." Jiraiya crossed his arms again and nodded. "Yeah, I heard about what went down in Wave. Don't worry, I'm not going to judge you for it. They're your team. Besides, I'm sure you've already had plenty of that." He heard the third make a noise of disapproval behind him. "Well, glad to hear Sasuke's alright. From what the old man told me, they've come a long way," Jiraiya said. "So tell me about Naruto." Kakashi had been expecting that. From the moment he noticed Jiraiya's presence, he closed his "Well, he's not known as Konoha's #1 hyperactive knucklehead ninja for nothing. When he was first assigned to me, he was a prankster who was always vying for attention. No surprise given how he was treated, and he had a degree of overconfidence that was just staggering, always trying to prove he was better than Sasuke, kinda like you and Orochimaru." He then opened his eye. "But he had the same heart as his father, even if he was a bit rough around the edges, and he's grown by leaps and bounds. Even if his mouth might still be a bit too big for his own good, at least now he can back up most of his claims, and he's quicker to recognize when he's out of his league. He's put that mind of his to good use, showing that all that time playing pranks was anything but a waste, and he has the same dream as his parents." Jiraiya chuckled at that. "To become Hokage, huh? For the same reasons, I bet. Guess the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." Kakashi shook his head. "I can see a lot of them in him." Jiraiya hummed and thought. "Tell me about what you're teaching him." Kakashi did from his admittedly abysmal first lessons that had Jiraiya frowning to their new regime and everything he tried to teach him. The legendary ninja side Rasengan. I'd hoped to pass his father's technique down to him myself." Jiraiya mused. Kakashi thought to himself that if that was the case, he should have been here before he'd had let Naruto down. Kakashi wasn't going to deny that, but as much as he respected Jiraiya, he had failed the boy more. "But I can't blame you. You had as much a right to teach Naruto that technique as I did, and at least you were here, unlike me," Jiraiya said somewhat bitterly. So he was aware of it. "Well, it's good to know you didn't just follow Orochimaru here," Kakashi noted. "I was planning to take over the boys' training," Jiraiya admitted, looking out the window. Kakashi bit back an argument as he considered that wording. "I'm sensing a," but Jiraiya buried his hand in his long white mane as he looked away. "But I know me, and I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have thought of taking advantage of shadow clones the way you did, and with all you've managed to teach him and his teammates, yeah, you're doing as well as I could, maybe better. I wouldn't be doing him any favors taking him off your hands." Kakashi's eye widened slightly. That wasn't what he expected from his sensei's teacher. It helped put to rest some lingering guilt over his early days. With his team, he wants to master the Uzumaki clan's art. "Is that right?" Jiraiya asked, and Kakashi nodded. "Well, consider me his tutor in sealing jutsu. I'll take him under my wing and teach him a few others of my own personal tricks, but I'll leave him to you for the most part." Well, he wasn't going to argue about that. Jiraiya was the foremost expert of sealing jutsu in the nations after all. "But there is one other thing I need to teach him ASAP. And what's that? Kakashi asked. How to tap into the Kyuubi's power? Kakashi frowned. Now here he had mixed feelings. On the one hand, Naruto probably should be able to, it was kind of the point of Jinchuriki in general, and he needed to know how to control it. Wave proved that. Still, trust me, he's going to need it, Jiraiya said grimly. Kakashi's frown deepened. You know something I don't? It wasn't a question, I'm afraid. Hiruzen spoke up, drawing both pairs of eyes to him. Jiraiya's absence hasn't been solely due to his pursuit of Orochimaru. The next day Team 7 met in the now familiar rocky grounds outside the village. Before we begin training today, Kakashi began. Naruto, there's someone who wants to meet with you. The blonde blinked as Sasuke frowned while Sakura looked curious. Who's that? Kakashi-sensei. I'll let that be a surprise. The copy ninja answers. Meet them in the third training ground at 5. Naruto's brow furrowed. He crossed his arms and tilted his head. I don't get why this guy can't just come here. He then shrugged. But fine, I don't have any plans today anyway. Naruto felt a bit nostalgic as he walked up to the trio of posts near the heart of the third training ground. It had been a while since he'd been here. It looked like he'd gotten there first. He didn't see any signs of anyone else. He looked around the clearing, finding reminders of the day he and his team took the bell test, and smiled fondly at the thought. His expression shifted and became somber. Then as he walked up to the memorial stone, he read through the names of his village's fallen heroes until he found 2 in particular, Obito Uchiha and Rin Noara. He didn't know them, but from what Kakashi had told them, he would have liked to. They were precious to his sensei, and sadly they died around the same age he was now. He closed his eyes and put his hands together in prayer for a moment. Well, nice to see kids paying respect where it's due. A voice from behind him said. Naruto instantly turned around, tense and ready for a fight. Leaning against a tree near the edge of the clearing was a tall, white-haired man he'd never seen before, watching him with a smirk. And who are you supposed to be? Naruto asked. You the guy I'm supposed to meet here? The man just chuckled. Well, I'm glad you asked it. That the man placed his palm forward, his head held high in a dramatic pose. My name is known throughout the elemental nations, a hero of 2 ninja world wars, a man whose very name sends villains fleeing into the shadows, the one known as the Toad Sage of Mount Myaboku. He slid 1 foot forward, spinning his head so that his ponytail whipped through the air, and raising his other hand over his head. The one, the only, the legendary Jiraiya of the Sannin, another one of the students of the 3rd Hokage, and the man who trained his father, the 4th Hokage. This wasn't what he'd expected. He thought it was a pretty cool introduction. Even if he didn't, it's not like he'd have room to talk. Just one look at his original ninja ID would tell you that. Still, he kinda expected such a legendary ninja to be more dignified like the old man. Besides, Naruto glared. Jiraiya, he began, and the legendary shinobi dropped his stance a little, looking at him curiously. You were close with my dad, right? Alright. Jiraiya seemed to see where he was going, dropping his pose entirely and rubbing the back of his head. Yeah, he was like family to me, he sighed. Naruto started to say something, but Jiraiya interrupted. Look kid, I can make excuses for why you've never heard from me, but what it boils down to is I had too much on my plate to come back to Konoha. Hell, I hadn't set foot here for years before the Kyuubi attack. I'm Konoha's spymaster, and I've been onto something big, too big for me to walk away from. Naruto pointed accusingly. And that stopped you from just dropping by for one day to say hi? I knew your old man, it was sensitive stuff, Jiraiya argued back. And what the hell was so important you couldn't lay off of it for what, a week? You don't need to know right now, Jiraiya shot back. He then sighed. Look, you've got every right to be mad, but it's not like I didn't keep my ear to the ground about you. Who do you think sent you that frog wallet? You still hang on to that? Drew Naruto up short. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his frog-like wallet stuffed to the brim. Jiraiya chuckled. I wanted to send a toad-shaped one, but that's the closest I could find. He then smirked and pointed his thumb at himself. Truth is, half the gifts the old man gave you over the years were actually sent by yours truly. Naruto looked back at his wallet and briefly remembered back to his 5th birthday when he opened a gift box from the 3rd Hokage. He'd said it came from a friend of his father, but wouldn't tell him anymore, so it was. I know it's not quite enough, but part of the reason I came here was to try to make up for lost time. Now that business brought me back around, Jiraiya continued, and I've got something for you. With that, he clapped his hands together before slamming his palm to the ground. The Toad Sage vanished in a burst of smoke, and when it cleared, Naruto's eyes widened to find he was sitting on the back of an orange toad with blue markings. It was so big that Jiraiya could sit on the back of his neck. It had a necklace of blue beads hanging from its neck, the largest one at the center bearing the kanji for loyalty, and in its mouth, wrapped up in its tongue, was a large scroll. Woe! Summoning jutsu, Naruto said in amazement. Haha, that's right brat, and this is for you. At Jiraiya's words, the toad opened its mouth, its tongue unfurled, extending to lay the scroll at Naruto's feet. Naruto frowned. What's Jiraiya stopped him, the toad's tongue pressing down on the scroll to keep him from opening it. Naruto glared and raised a fist. Hey, what gives, old man? What even is this scroll anyway? That, Naruto, is the summoning scroll of the toads, Jiraiya informed him with a smirk, causing Naruto's eyes to widen. All you have to do is sign it and you'll be able to summon them just like me. Naruto blinked. Really, that's all? He'd thought there would be more to it than that. Yep, that's it, just sign the scroll in blood and you'll be a toad summoner too. Jiraiya then cupped his chin. Of course, some of the stronger ones might not listen to you if you don't get their respect first. Naruto grinned, brimming with excited energy. Awesome, so if you'll just let me sign it. And nope, the legendary shinobi held up one finger. You've got to agree to something first. Huh, what is it? Naruto asked eagerly, ready to answer whatever challenge Jiraiya threw at him, only for the Sanin's condition to take the wind out of his sails. Jiraiya looked at him severely and said, you've gotta let me teach you how to tap into the fox's chakra. Naruto stiffened. His mind went back to the bridge, to seeing Sasuke lying unmoving, then how everything was consumed in red and all he could think about was hatred for the masked boy. I know, I heard about your only experience with it so far, Jiraiya said solemnly with a nod, but you need to learn to control it, not only so you can use the strength to keep from getting in that situation again, but so it doesn't control you if you pull it out by mistake. That drew Naruto up short. If a Jinchuriki is consumed by their Biju's chakra, they become berserkers at a certain point. They lose the ability to tell friend from foe, and that's just the start, Jiraiya explained before his eyes narrowed. If you completely lose control of the chakra, the seal will break, the fox will be let loose, and I'm pretty sure the old man explained what'll happen to you. Naruto flinched. Yeah, he died. Besides, it's past time. Most Jinchuriki are taught to tap into their Biju's power when they're a bit over half your age and given special training. I get that the old man wanted you to live a normal life, and I agree with him to a point, but just look at what happened. You almost flunked out of the academy because they didn't think to teach you to control your chakra properly. Naruto grimaced. He couldn't lie. Jiraiya made some points. I'm sweetening the deal with this contract, so kid, what's it going to be? Naruto briefly fought with himself. He really didn't want to use that chakra, but Jiraiya raised good points. He didn't want to lose himself to it if he accidentally drew it out, and if he was stronger, maybe what happened in Wave wouldn't have been so close. Not to mention Jiraiya's former teammate was after Sasuke. They'd need all the power they could get. Naruto was silent for a moment before he answered, staring down at his feet. Okay, not just okay, Jiraiya said. I hear you don't go back on your words, so want your promise as a shinobi? Naruto grimaced. Jiraiya had been keeping tabs on him. He absolutely refused to break his word ever. He glared. Fine, I give you my word as a shinobi of Konoha. I'll learn how to use the fox's chakra. Jiraiya nodded and smirked. Then let's get down to business. With that, the toad's tongue unrolled the scroll, revealing several empty spots followed by names with their fingerprints at the base, all black except for Jiraiya's, which was written in red. It was the name directly after his that caught his attention, Minato Namikaze. Naruto blinked, staring at the name for a second before looking up at Jiraiya, who chuckled. Yep, he got the contract from me, and now I want you to sign it. The toads are one of the best contracts out there. Oh, and if you think that you might find another good one, don't worry, they don't mind if you sign 2 or 3 of these. He placed one hand on his knee. This isn't all I'm planning to help you with. I hear you want to learn sealing jutsu. Well, you're looking at the #1 expert of sealing jutsu in all the lands. I can help you with your clan's lost art, and there's plenty of other things I can teach you too. This is just the beginning. He then leaned forward. Naruto wouldn't lie and say he completely forgave Jiraiya, especially not after that stunt, but this guy trained his father and he was one of the strongest shinobi alive. He'd be stupid to turn this down. Besides, he was probably honest about wanting to make up for lost time. He'd give the old man a chance. All right, Naruto said before raising a fist, grinning, and when all said and done, you can say you trained too, Hokage. Jiraiya chuckled. Well, we've got a ways to go, so why don't you go ahead and sign the scroll? He kneeled down and bit his thumb, signing the empty space before smearing the crimson liquid over all his fingertips and pressing them onto the sheet. Congratulations, kid, you are now a proud summoner of the toads of Mount Myaboku. Jiraiya said. Cool, so I just clap my hands and hold on there, Jiraiya said, raising his palm in a stop gesture, causing Naruto to freeze. Before we do that, I want to do some training with you, huh? Naruto squinted at him. Why couldn't they do that after he tried out his new jutsu? I want you to walk on water while I take stock of your Skills. I can give you some pointers in the meantime, but more importantly I want you to use up all your chakra. Why? Jiraiya gave him a severe look so that when you try the summoning jutsu you'll draw out the fox's chakra. Naruto grimaced. Already, so let's get started. Hours later, and Naruto lay on his back by the river, chest heaving as he panted. It had taken the better part of the afternoon, but the blonde was finally running low on chakra. Jiraiya had put him through the ringer. Everything Kakashi had him do at once, all on the water. Still, Jiraiya showed that he was the man who trained the fourth Hokage. He'd pointed out flaws in his fighting style, gave him some pointers with wind jutsu, and told him some things about the chains. Apparently he'd asked his mom about the chain barrier when he had been researching barrier ninjutsu. He'd told him the basics and promised to write down everything he knew on the subject in a scroll. When it was all over, Jiraiya had actually had to catch him. When he dispersed all the clones and all their exhaustion hit him, now he was lying on his back trying to center himself amid his clones' experiences. "Alright kid," Jiraiya began, standing over him. "We need to do this while you're still good and tired, so let's get to it, okay? Just give me a second," Naruto replied, sitting up and putting one hand on his brow. He shook his head and stood up, facing the Sannin without his usual energy. "Well, let's have it." Jiraiya closed his eye and held up one finger. "Now what I did earlier was a more advanced version of the technique for someone just starting out. You'll have to smear some blood on the hand you signed the contract with and then form the boar, dog, bird, monkey, and finally ram hand seals." He then frowned at Naruto. "I want you to reach deep into yourself, draw out as much chakra as possible, and summon the biggest thing that you can. Act as if your life depends on it." Naruto nodded, frowning down at his hand. He bit into his thumb, smeared a line of red onto his palm, and closed his eyes. He tried to do as the Toad Sage told him. He then ran through the hand seals and slammed his palm onto the ground, summoning jutsu. He immediately knew he had failed. No chakra other than his own, and a small cloud burst around his hand. When it cleared, it revealed a small toad over twice the size of a normal one, but still nothing compared to the one Jiraiya summoned. It was orange too, and had purple markings around its eyes, lips, and chest. Oddly, it wore a tiny vest. The toad raised its front leg in greeting. "Hey, what's up? Are you a new summoner?" Naruto blinked. He could talk. Well, not the strangest thing he knew of, he guessed. He grinned and pointed to himself with his thumb. "Yep, I'm Naruto Uzumaki. Nice to meet you." "Same to you. The name's Gamakichi." The now named Toad answered. Jiraiya sighed and crossed his arms. "Well, that was a bust." He then cupped his chin. "Still, it's something that even worn out as you were, you didn't wind up with a tadpole." "Oh hey, if it isn't the old pervert." "Well, I guess the newbie had to get the contract from somewhere," Gamakichi said, looking up at Jiraiya. "What's shaking?" Naruto frowned and looked up at the Sannin questioningly. "Pervert." Naruto had expected Jiraiya to say something in his own defense, but was severely disappointed. Instead, the white-haired man chuckled and crossed his arms. "Yep, you're looking at one of the most refined appreciators of the female form on the entire continent, the Kyuubi Jinchurikis." I twitched as he glared at the legendary ninja, and he's proud of that. This was the guy who'd trained his father. Yep, the man was a far cry from his own sensei. He sighed and decided to change the subject. "So you want me to try again? Can Gamakichi stick around?" The little toad seemed pretty cool. Actually, let's call it a day," Jiraiya replied. Naruto blinked again. "What?" Jiraiya gave him a grin. "I think we've won enough for one day. Why don't you get to know your new friend?" He then waved at the blonde. "See ya." "Hey, wait a minute," Naruto yelled in vain as the Sannin disappeared in a burst of smoke. He sighed before he crossed his arms and started to grumble. "Damn it, what the hell? After all that work to burn through my chakra." "Heh, he's just like my old man," said Gamakichi. Noted. Naruto looked down at the little toad. "Well, if they'd be working together, they should probably get to know each other." Jiraiya was right about that. "At least so. Ever been to Konoha?" "Nope, this is the first time anyone's ever summoned me." "The not so little toad said before raising a brow, aiming for something bigger. "I take it." Naruto rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. "Yeah, the old perv kinda wanted me to try summoning when I was low on chakra as an exercise." He then perked up. "But hey, why don't I show you around? Sounds fun," Gamakichi said before leaping up onto Naruto's shoulder. "Hey, know any sweet shops?" "Oh, got a thing for candy." "Yep, but nothing like my brother." "Then let's make sure you bring something back for him." "Alright, kid, let's try something, eh?" "Little different," Jiraiya said as he looked down on Naruto. The next day, this time the Sannin had led the blonde genin into a clearing far outside the village, deep into the forest. "So we're not going to talk about how you just left me high and dry the other day?" Naruto asked dryly. "Hey, it's just as I said, it was a good chance for you to make friends with your new summon," Jiraiya replied, placing a hand on his hip. "Trust me, he's not going to be that small for long." Naruto just stared and made a sound of Annoyance. Think about it, kid. Would you appreciate it if someone called you out of the blue and then sent you right back because they were looking for someone else? Naruto winced and rubbed the back of his head. Yeah, you have a point, and he seemed pretty cool. I mean, it's not like I would have just sent him back, but he would have just wound up sitting around watching you train otherwise. Jiraiya pointed out. Naruto sighed. Yeah, that was true. If he'd thought about it, he'd probably have wanted to call it quits then too. After pulling Gamakichi from his home with no warning like that, he'd just been irritated with how the Sannin handled it, just up and leaving without any explanation. After a few moments, Naruto sighed. So what are we trying this time? Well, for starters, sit down, Jiraiya said as he sat down cross-legged on the ground. Naruto followed suit. It's not exactly my area of expertise. I definitely wouldn't try to use it in a fight, but I do have some passing skill with Genjutsu. Let's see if I can't help you get in touch with the power resting inside you. The sage then grimaced. This might be tough. If this doesn't work, we'll have to try to simulate what got you to tap into it in the first place. Naruto shared his expression as he recalled that day on the bridge. Well, let's hope for the best, the Toad Sage said before he ran through a series of hand signs. Naruto felt the effects immediately and began to feel drowsy. Then his focus turned inward as conscious thought began to float away. His attention turned to the power coursing through his chakra network. He'd never before felt so in turn with it. He could almost map its course through his body. He managed to recall what he was doing this for and looked deep through the river of blue for the red he barely remembered. He dove deeper and deeper until he found it like a crimson sun shining deep in the sea of azure. He reached for it, and suddenly full awareness returned as Naruto's eyes shot open. But as his eyes darted around his surroundings, he found he was no longer in the forest. He stood in what looked like a sewer system, with his feet were ankle-deep in water. Droplets condensed on the pipes that littered the ceiling above, dripping down and making ripples in the water below. As he looked up, he couldn't see, but he could feel the chakra coursing through the pipes. But it wasn't his chakra, it was far more powerful, and seemed to radiate a feeling of hatred he could sense stealing his eyes. He followed the flow of the crimson chakra. He made his way through the halls until he reached a large room. On the other side of the chamber lay a massive cage, pipes trailing out from the corners where it met the wall. Naruto knew what had to lie within. Taking a breath, he approached. As he neared the cage, two massive eyes, ruby with slit pupils, opened within the darkness. Then sharp teeth were bared, each easily as large as he was. Well, if it isn't my jailer, a deep voice rumbled from within the cage. The eyes shifted, their owner seeming to weigh him. I had wondered when you'd finally show yourself here. So this was the QB, the nine-tailed fox that had nearly destroyed Konoha and cost his parents and countless others their lives. He wasn't sure what to say. He felt anger, fear, surprise that it had spent these years in this sewer, and wondering if that was the seal's doing or what it meant for his mindscape. In the end, he took a breath and went with his default, yeah, well, can you blame me? I didn't know you were here until half a year ago, the fox huffed. I'm well aware I've been forced to watch your insipid life play out from within this cage. Naruto blinked. How you can see what's going on outside? He wasn't sure how he felt about the QB watching his life. I see you still have a talent for stating the obvious, the QB replied in annoyance. He frowned. Then you know why I'm here. Obviously, the Toad's latest prospect wants to teach you to use my power. The fox sighed. Well, as much as I loathe being imprisoned, I can't escape from this infernal seal. Besides, now those crimson eyes focused on him, there might be something you can do for me. Naruto glared up at the fox. What the hell could you want me to do for you? The fox laughed. You have guts to glare at me like that, or is it ignorance? In any case, it's not something you need to worry about for now. Don't expect me to let you use my power frivolously. Crimson chakra seeped through the bars, pouring towards Naruto like a wave before wrapping around him. But as I don't have much choice, I'll loan you my chakra. Naruto opened his eyes back. In reality, the once azure orbs now matching the fox's eyes as an aura of crimson surrounded him. The chakra felt hot, like it might burn him. There was a slight haze in his mind, foreign anger that he fought to suppress. It was much easier than it had been on the bridge, with his own rage adding fuel to the flames. Jiraiya smirked. Well, looks like it worked. Naruto stared at his hand, the nails on his fingers sharpened to a point. Again, he'd need to talk to Kakashi about this. Naruto checked the bandages wrapped around his wrists before rolling down his sleeves. He zipped up his tracksuit before looking in the mirror with a confident grin. A month had passed since the prelims ended, a month of harsh training time spent with friends old and new, and talking with the man who'd trained his father. Now the time had come. Today he and his team would make Chunin. He knew it, satisfied that he was all set to go. The blonde left home. He'd rarely seen so few people on the streets as at this moment. He bet the arena was packed. He took to an alley bounding up the walls to the roof. From there he could see a large procession of people going down the main road lined with onlookers. The VIPs were here, all right. He hopped back down to the streets and made his way to Konoha's arena. He'd always wondered what went down in there. He found his team waiting for him at the side entrance away from the crowds. Hey guys, he greeted Sasuke and Sakura, looks like I'm the last one. Draw up some last-minute tricks, Sasuke asked. Naruto grinned something like, that you guys ready to show everyone what we're made of, he asked, punching his open palm with his fist. He got 2 nods with a look of determination from Sakura and a smirk from Sasuke. The 3 of them then walked inside together. Fu looked down from her rooftop vantage point, her legs hanging off the edge as she watched the line of visitors to the village trail onwards toward the arena. She'd gotten up and prepared for her big day bright and early so that she knew she wouldn't miss this. Despite how long she'd been waiting here, she watched no less attentively than when she first arrived. She watched the people eagerly looking for the person she hoped to see. For the mint-haired girl turned around to see Jichi appear. How long are you going to wait up here? You're going to be late. Don't worry about me, Fu replied with a smile, before gazing back into the crowd. I know what time it is. I'm not going to let Shibuki down by being late. She wasn't sure she'd be able to look herself in the mirror again if she did, and that's why you're up here, right? You're waiting to see if he's going to be here, Jichi guessed with a raised brow as he crossed his arms. Fu just giggled and closed her eyes. At least he knew her that well. She wondered if maybe he was starting to warm up to her. He had considered meeting her new friends a few times, and he and their sensei asked what she'd been up to with them. It was nice that they were looking out for her, even if she couldn't tell if it was because they cared or just because of her importance to Taki. Jichi sighed. Well, I might as well wait up here too. It'd be nice knowing he's cheering us on. The mint-haired girl briefly looked back at him with a beaming smile before looking back at the crowd. You know, I half expected you to cause some big scene. As you did at the tower, you get everyone back home up in arms enough, Jichi noted. That's because they don't like it when I go exploring, and well, you know, right, like the time you decided to vanish for a whole day to make the Chunin play hide and seek with you, Jichi asked dryly, getting another giggle from Fu as she sheepishly rubbed the back of her head. It was then that Fu's eyes widened. She shot to her feet with a beaming smile as her hands formed eager fists in front of her. Look, there he is down below, walking amid the arrivals was a trio of Taki shinobi. At their head was a young man just out of his teens. The man had black eyes and long dark brown hair. He wore gray pants with a green shirt and had a gray shoulder pad on his left shoulder with a brown strap across his waist. Fu brought her hands to her mouth, made a funnel, and called out, "Hey Shibuki." The man turned surprised eyes up to her and she waved down at him. He returned the gesture with a smile. Fu squealed happily. Well satisfied, Jichi asked. Yep, let's go make him proud. As Naruto and his team entered the stadium, he paused as he looked up at the stands. They were almost packed full, and the blonde could see more people coming up through the many stairs. No surprise, he guessed, considering how many VIPs were here. He wondered where Kakashi was. He had to be up there somewhere. He looked beside him to see how his teammates were handling it. Sasuke seemed apathetic of the many eyes that were on them, while Sakura seemed nervous. Sakura, Naruto said, getting her attention. Just take a breath. We've got this, Sasuke grunted in agreement. You've come this far. The pink-haired girl took a breath and nodded, smiling slightly. Thanks guys, Naruto grinned. Come on, that promotion's waiting on us. The 3 genin walked forward, joining the others standing in a line before a Chunin. Naruto frowned as he got a look at the guy. What happened to that Height guy? The previous proctor had been replaced by a man with straight shoulder-length brown hair and matching eyes. He wore the standard Konoha shinobi attire with a bandana-style forehead protector. He had a senbon in his mouth, his hands in his pockets as he eyed the new arrivals. Hope he's alright. He did seem sick, Naruto thought, remembering the dark circles under Heights' eyes and how often he coughed. He looked at the other genin lined up in front of him and found they were some of the last to arrive. Shikamaru, Hinata, and Gaara's team were already there. Hey Shikamaru, Naruto greeted as he and his team approached the lineup. You all set for your match? Hardly, Shikamaru replied with a sigh. This is such a drag, Naruto chuckled. Some things never changed. It was a while later that Naruto heard quick footfalls. He turned to see Fu entering the arena. Jichi trailing behind. Naruto smiled. Hey, cutting it close, huh? Fu stopped beaming at him. Naruto, get this, Shibuki's here. After all, Naruto's brows shot up and then he looked at her curiously. Oh, is that what you were doing? The mint-haired girl nodded her head. Yep, I just had to see if he would be here with the other VIPs, and I've gotta show him. He was right to send me here. She then pointed at Sasuke with an exuberant grin. No holding back during our match, Sasuke. Let's show everyone our best. No need to tell me that, Sasuke replied with a smirk. Hey, pipe down, the proctor said. This isn't the schoolyard, you know. That drew the attention of all the genin. Try to look good for the customers. At that, all the hopefuls stood at attention, waiting for the exam to Start time passed as the genin stood at attention, but there were no signs of any new arrivals, or at least not down in the field. Naruto's wandering eyes landed on the Hokage looking down on the proceedings from the highest spot when he saw others join him. Two men flanked a third wearing matching attire to the Hokage's, but blue where their Ruzens were red. Naruto couldn't make out much about him from so far away, but he was wearing a matching hat too, but with a cloth mask that covered half of his face. I guess that's the Kazekage. Naruto glanced at the Suna Genin. Gaara was giving their leader an intense glare, but aside from that they didn't seem to react. Minutes ticked by, and as the time for the exams to start approached, still the final hopeful didn't show. Strange, given that it seemed like Orochimaru had wanted them to participate. Wouldn't he care that this would embarrass his village? Then again, given who he was talking about, maybe not. Finally the third Hokage stood. Everyone, before we begin, I would like to thank you all for coming to Konoha's Chunin exams. The third god of shinobi called out, his voice echoing throughout the arena. We will now start the tournament between all the participants who made it this far. I ask that you stay and watch until the end. Alright, the proctor said, turning to face them. It looks like we have a no-show. He then turned his brown eyes on Gaara. If you're late for your match, that's an automatic forfeit. Bad luck. Hers was up first, therefore by default Gaara is the winner of the first match. The redhead just scoffed. The crowd meanwhile didn't seem happy about that. Naruto could hear the people grumbling about it. No surprise, he doubted that happened often. Well, nothing we can do but move on. The proctor then pointed his thumb at his chest. Name's Genma Shiranui, and I'll be the proctor from here on out. Now, in case anyone's forgotten, he said before he reached into his pocket and pulled out a sheet of paper. Here are the matchups for the final round of the Chunin exams. It was the same sheet Ibiki had drawn up a month ago. We're moving on to the second match. Rules are the same as the prelims. There are no rules. The fight continues until either I decide it's over or one of you dies or acknowledges defeat. Genma briefly explained. Now everyone but Sasuke and Fu head up to the waiting room, he said, jerking his head at the open room above. As the genin sans the combatants made their way to the stands, Naruto half turned to face them and said, break a leg. You two. Fu took her spot across from Sasuke, took a deep breath, steeled herself and slipped into her fighting stance, while Sasuke did the same. This was it. This was what Fu had spent the last month training for. Here was her chance to put Taki's name back on the map, just like Shibuki dreamed of. Her brother, who was watching right now, was somewhere up in the stands. Time to make him proud. The mint-haired girl was tense, her brow furrowed as she looked at her opponent with determination. As she waited, the proctor raised his hand and began. Fu shot forward, blurring out of sight as crimson bled into Sasuke's eyes. The Sharingan, the dojutsu of the Uchiha clan, and she didn't know what it did. She could guess it was an eye ability, so it probably improved his sight, maybe let him read movements or see things the naked eye can't. The way he fought during his prelim match told her that much. Her strategy would be good to test out those eyes abilities, but it wasn't the right time to spring at that. Left only one way to find out, so she thought before the world faded away, leaving her in a void. Naruto frowned as he saw Fu go stiff as stone. Then he saw her relax and come out of her fighting stance, standing at ease despite the proctor's command. For a moment he wondered what had happened, then he noticed Sasuke do the same with a smirk and realized what had happened. What happened? Lee asked, looking down at the arena in confusion. Sasuke must have caught her in a genjutsu. Sakura noted. End of fight before it begins if you have the chance. Just like Kakashi-sensei taught them. Naruto gripped the railing, staring hard down into the arena. Yeah, that sounds like what he'd do. Lee's eyes widened that quickly. He then frowned as he looked at the two combatants, probably wondering if Sasuke could have done that when he challenged him before. Geez, Chi-Chi said with a sigh, putting one hand on his head. Thought so. Shikamaru agreed. It's the smart move. He might be showing his hand a little early, but it'll mean he'll be fresh in the next match. He eyed Gaara, and given who his opponent is, Sakura shook her head and looked to the ground. Ah man, I can't say I blame him, but poor Fu. Yeah, his thoughts exactly. He was torn. On the one hand he couldn't help but applaud his rival and teammate for winning so quickly, but on the other he'd hate to see his new friend, someone he felt surprisingly connected, to go down like this. It would be humiliating to lose before the match even started. His grip tightened on the cold steel of the railing as he watched Sasuke walk up to his opponent. Come on Fu, do something. The proctor put his hand on his hip. Naruto didn't doubt. He already knew what had happened. You know, you two can start anytime, right? Sasuke looked to the proctor. That won't be necessary. My opponent will no longer be able to battle. The proctor crossed his arms. Oh, he turned to Fu. Is he correct? Can you no longer fight? No response. Sasuke stopped right in front of her. See, he said, reaching out to push her. She can't even stand. Just before he touched her, Fu's arm snapped up like a predator and caught Sasuke's wrist. What the Uchiha said, taking an involuntary step back at the unexpected action. Fu's eyes are now shone with their usual brightness, looking right into his Sharingan. Sorry Sasuke, maybe next time. Naruto grinned way to go for how had she broken out of the Sharingan's genjutsu. He knew well the power of his clan's vaunted eyes. From stories to personal experiences, he knew how quickly those techniques could end a fight. So how had Fu broken it so quickly? He doubted she was a prodigy with genjutsu or chakra rivaled Naruto's, bizarre as that was, and he knew firsthand from seeing Naruto train how much more difficult that made controlling it, that made learning things like genjutsu much harder. A Kekkei Genkai of her own, doubtful given that she didn't have a family name, but not out of the question. Special training to counter genjutsu. Why that specifically? Any further musings were cut off when Fu pressed her advantage, throwing a punch at his chest. He deflected the blow but was taken off balance when Fu pulled at his captured arm, pulling him right into a knee to the gut. She spun on her heel, momentum aiding to the high kick that landed squarely on his jaw, sending him reeling back. She shot forward, blurring out of sight, and drove her fist right into his solar plexus while he was still dazed from the blow. Another kick to the chin sent him into the air. Fu leaped into the air after him, peppering him with blows before spinning and slamming her leg into his back, sending him crashing to the ground. That was his chance. He recovered and looked up, then out of the corner of his eye seeing her weave hand seals webbing burst from her hands, a single thick thread ending in a net that would ensnare Sasuke, but the Uchiha kicked himself to the side. Sasuke landed on his feet and his crimson eyes honed in on Fu. As she landed, she immediately vanished in another burst of speed, but he could see her every move, his eyes showing him a shadow of where she would go. Fu reappeared in front of Sasuke, spun and swept out her arm only for the Uchiha to duck under the attack. He jumped back when she continued her momentum and lashed out with her leg. The mint-haired kunoichi pressed the attack, launching forward with a jab. Sasuke brushed the attack aside with his forearm. He sidestepped when she lashed out with a kick and then grabbed her arm when she jabbed at him with her elbow. He retaliated with a kick and she quickly raised her arm to shield her chest from the blow. Sasuke then leaped into the air and twisted, aiming another kick at her head. She ducked beneath the attack and the two disengaged, Sasuke kicking off her chest. As she forced herself back, she burst into motion, vanishing and reappearing in bursts of speed as Sasuke's head turned this way and that to keep her in his line of sight. She weaved in and out, striking him before backing off. Then she leaped into the air and came down at him and her fist raised back. That move. Sasuke vanished in a burst of speed of his own. He reappeared in the air about a dozen yards away, weaving hand signs before inhaling fire style Phoenix Flower Jutsu. He breathed out a stream of fireballs as Fu dodged left and right, forced back as he peppered the arena with fire. He landed, his view obscured by smoke, debris and embers, but he could still see her through her chakra. He saw her charge toward him and through shuriken before using body flicker. He saw from her movements that she deflected his ninja stars with a kunai before throwing more in his direction. Was she a sensor, or did she just have good hearing? The latter made sense. She'd need to be able to fight without sight to make the most use of that silver powder technique of hers. He saw her throw something his way and heard the sound of metal cutting through the air. He drew a kunai of his own to deflect the attacks, only for his eyes to widen as he saw what was attached to the kunai. Smoke bombs. They erupted, covering a good part of the arena in black smog. As Fu charged to meet him, she leaped into a high kick. Sasuke ducked under the attack, gritting his teeth. He could still see her chakra, but without reading the subtle shift in her muscles. The Sharingan couldn't predict her moves. Not good, because as Sasuke surmised from seeing Fu fight so far, she seemed to focus on taijutsu in close-range combat. He swept his leg out to knock her off her feet as she landed, only for her to leap over the attack. She raised her leg in an axe kick and he jumped back. He reached into his pouch and drew shuriken wrapped in ninja wire. He threw them and smirked as he sensed them sail past her in the smog. Then he clicked his tongue as she leaped into the air and vanished in a burst of speed. Damn, she figured it out. She must have remembered how that trick from the prelims. He turned his head from side to side, catching brief glimpses of Fu darting around him. Then, as she did, he heard the hiss of pressurized air around him. More smoke bombs. Great. He sensed danger just in time to duck as she flew over his head from behind. She landed and spun on her heels, closing the distance between them immediately. He moved to deflect a blow aimed at his head, but found it a feint when Fu suddenly dived down, spun on the ground, and whipped up her leg at him. The Uchiha leaned back to dodge, only for the mint-haired kunoichi to grab his ankle. She pulled him off of his feet as she spun and raised herself up. Sasuke had just enough time to raise his hands over his chest before a kick sent him flying. She blurred forward and continued her assault. Sasuke blocked the first two attacks before she slipped through his guard and landed a jab on his jaw, whipping his head back. Another blow had him double overthinking. Quickly Sasuke reached into his pouch, pulled out a ball of explosive tags and dropped it as it began sparking and popping. Fu took the hint and kicked herself back. Sasuke did the same right before it went off between them. The Uchiha dropped 2 more before retreating further into the smog. He came to a dead stop just the last tag went off, his eyes honing in on Fu. The mint-haired girl had stopped moving. Good, she'd lost track of him, and as long as he didn't make any noise he'd bought himself some breathing room. The hissing had also stopped, so the smoke should start clearing now and then. Fu began to move again, weaving hand seals and releasing another net of webs in a random direction, then another. Okay, then never mind, waiting this out. Sasuke put his hands together in a tiger sign and vanished in a burst of speed. Fu immediately noticed and followed as he sped through the clearing smoke. He smirked as his vision cleared just as she caught up with him. He turned to face her once more, his Sharingan read and predicted her move. She threw a jab at him as the Uchiha raised his arm as if to guard, only for tilt to the side, deflecting the attack with his free arm. Next he drove his elbow into her torso, knocking the wind out of her. He then ducked down and twisted into a high kick aimed square at her chin. Fu was sent into the air and Sasuke kneeled down before vanishing, reappearing behind her as she sailed through the air, dancing leaf shadow. Sasuke said, "Looks like I've got you right where I want you. Don't be so sure about that," Fu replied as she swept her arm out. He easily deflected it, maneuvering her into position for a finishing move, but then she raised her arm and jabbed her elbow back into his chest. He blocked the attack, but when he pushed back, the mint-haired girl twisted her body and swung her leg out. He blocked with his own and Fu pushed herself away from him, causing him to click his teeth. They both landed and she immediately blurred over to him again before changing direction at the last minute. He ducked as she attacked him from behind, driving his foot up into her chest. He spun to follow up, but Fu quickly formed 2 hand seals and breathed out a cloud of glittering silver powder. Sasuke immediately shot backward away from the cloud. He cursed under his breath. The powder was formed of chakra. He couldn't see anything inside of it, but it also gave him an opportunity. He ran through hand seals and needed chakra in his chest. Fire style, fireball jutsu. He only needed a small one, so he breathed out a fireball and watched it fly into the silver cloud. The effect was immediate. The whole thing went up with a bang, the wind tousling Sasuke's hair as he shielded his face, and when everything cleared there was nothing, no sign of his opponent. He clicked his tongue. Fu had known he'd do that, and now he'd lost track of her. Now where did she is? Danger senses screamed at him and he ducked just in time to avoid a kick through the air. He looked up and prepared to strike at Fu, only for another one to appear in front of his widening eyes. A kick to his chest sent him flying through the air right into a third Fu, but he recovered in time. He twisted his body, blocking a punch from her with his forearm before using her arm to flip himself into the air, bringing his foot down on her. When one of the other Fus came at him with a kick, he grabbed her leg and continued his attack, only to toss himself into the air when the last one came at him from the other side. When he landed, he gave the 3 an amused look. Really a clone jutsu copycat? Yep, that's how Fu had thought Sasuke would feel about it, just like she'd hoped he would. Fu grinned. Well, it's a pretty good trick for fighting someone with a dojutsu maybe, but it's one I'm used to, Sasuke said confidently, slipping back into his fighting stance. Yep, that was the point. Fu and her clones went on the offensive, vanishing at once in bursts of speed before coming at Sasuke from different directions. Sasuke turned his head to see an attack coming at him from behind. He sidestepped a kick but ducked down when another clone aimed a blow at his neck. He grasped its forearm and threw both away as another Fu attacked from his side. He kicked himself back before deflecting a jab with his forearm, but it was then that the others rejoined the fight. He raised his arm to block an axe kick from above, grunting under its force before another clone landed a blow square on his chest, only for him to burst into smoke, which quickly cleared to reveal a log. The log covered in explosive tags. The Fus scattered just in time to evade the explosion, and as they came to a stop, they all turned to see Sasuke overhead. The Uchiha air threw a series of explosive kunai down at them, and soon the arena was littered with explosions as they charged towards Sasuke. They heard the sound of fire roaring towards them. Dragons made of fire tore through the smoke, 8 of them coming from this way, and that the Fus dodged the attacks, but it was then that Sasuke charged into the clearing smog, more dragons following just behind him. He singled one out as the dragons kept the others at bay. The clone charged to meet him as her counterparts dodged the fire. She vanished in a burst of speed. Just as they were about to clash, she reappeared behind Sasuke and threw a volley of shuriken at him. The Uchiha air ducked beneath the attack as Fu launched herself at him, springing into a kick aimed at his head. The Uchiha leaned back and raised his leg, her attack sailing over his head as his foot dug into her chest. The real Fu grinned when she saw this. Sasuke clearly didn't realize his mistake as the Fu he kicked turned white as his foot dug through its chest. However, he clearly did a moment later when his eyes widened in shock as the clone suddenly exploded into webs. What he exclaimed as the webs covered everything in a 6-foot radius around him. His right side was fully bound, keeping him from forming hand signs. This was it. She had him. She came to a stop as her remaining clone charged to end the fight. Then Sasuke's right hand glowed. Blue lightning surged around his palm, allowing him to cut the webbing. He could use 2 elements. He threw his hand out at the clone and the lightning dispersed, shocking the clone and leaving it helpless. He ran past it, slicing its side with a shuriken held between his fingers as he went. He was well out of range when it burst into webs. Fu grit her teeth, remembering about his genjutsu. She closed her eyes and listened, hearing the sound of his footsteps, the quiet noise of his arm ripping through the air as he threw something, and then everything was drowned out by a loud popping. Fu opened her eyes, careful to look down and nod at Sasuke's face. She ducked as the Uchiha slashed at her before raising her arm to block a kick. She then threw herself back when he jumped into a flip, kicking at her, and looked at her at the first opportunity. No, you don't. She immediately closed her eyes as he landed and she came to a stop. She placed her hand on the ground. She then used a jutsu Shibuki had taught her, one that she'd never had a chance to use before since it was meant for spying missions. I've got you now, Sasuke. She sent the thought at him and the Uchiha froze, glancing over his shoulder. She immediately shot forward and slammed her foot into his chest. Before vanishing in a burst of speed, she appeared behind him in a crouch and kicked up at him, only for him to launch himself into the air above her. She looked away as he landed just before their eyes met and threw a paper bomb at him. No cry of pain. He avoided the explosion. Foot charged forward and ran through hand seals, hearing Sasuke running to meet her. Just as she cleared the cloud, she leapt above him. Net-shaped prison. She threw an expanding web at him, forcing him to leap to the side to avoid. She immediately made another, this time aimed where he would land. Sasuke clicked his teeth, dropping his shuriken, and made a single hand seal before breathing out a stream of fire at the ground, burning the web and kicking up a wall of flames. The moment she landed, Sasuke flashed in front of her with a body flicker, crouched down looking up at her, and instantly the world fell away, and she found herself in a void again, once more trapped in his illusions. It was broken a second later, but that had been all Sasuke needed already. The shuriken, wrapped with wires at halfway, made their first coil around her in seconds. She was unable to move. Sasuke smirked as he stood up straight. You took advantage of the fact that I was used to clone jutsu. I've fought Naruto's shadow clones so long, I never thought the real danger might be in destroying them. Pretty clever. Fu struggled fruitlessly against the wiring. She couldn't lose like this, not in front of Shibuki, but she couldn't move at all. Well, she could probably snap the wires if no, not even an option. She promised Shibuki, and even if she hadn't, that wasn't her power. She wasn't going to borrow it for something like this. Damn, she really wanted to win. Fu slumped. Yeah, that's what I was counting on, she said, looking down at the ground. Looks like you win. The proctor raised his arm. Fu has admitted defeat. The winner of the first match is Sasuke Uchiha. Sasuke began to walk away, but gave a glancing look back at Fu. The mint-haired girl was back to her usual bubbly self, chatting away with the proctor as he was helping to snap the wire she was encased in with his kunai. His eyes narrowed. His victory had left him feeling unusually bitter, unsatisfied. He thought back to those final seconds of the match. He could tell Fu had something up her sleeve, but then it was like she had just decided to throw the fight. There was no question about it. Fu had taken it easy on him. Part of him was angered by the blow to his pride, but the more pressing thing on his mind was, why was it because she had considered him a friend perhaps, but would she really throw a match for someone she'd only known for a month? Was she already injured somehow and didn't want to worsen an injury? Unlikely. She was hiding something worth throwing the match, worth giving up a promotion to Chunin. But what Naruto felt conflicted as he looked down at the arena with one hand on the railing, watching Fu start to exit, while the people in the stands cheered on. But of course Sasuke had already left. No surprise there. On the one hand, he wouldn't lie, part of him was glad his friend/rival had won. Of course, what sort of jerk wouldn't be? He'd like nothing more than for all his team to become Chunin and start the next phase of their careers together. But on the other hand, Fu was his friend too, and he couldn't imagine she was feeling good right now knowing her brother saw her lose. He had some experience with acting upbeat when you weren't feeling it. It's too bad, said Hinata. She'd been so excited to find out her leader would be watching. She doesn't seem to be taking it too hardly, observed Naruto. Frowned. Yeah, Fu seemed fine from here, but well, doesn't mean she's really feeling it. Naruto said. It was clear from his tone that he was speaking from experience. Sakura gave him a sympathetic glance. I wouldn't worry, Chichi commented, and Naruto frowned at him. He waved off the glare as He elaborated, everyone back home knows she and the boss mean the world to each other. Knowing him, he's probably on his way to give her a pep talk right now. He then looked to the ceiling. Hell, he'd do it for any of our ninja who's having a hard time if he could never mind her. Oh, from what Fu had said about her adoptive brother, that sounded like him. Still, he was worried about how she might feel after that loss. Maybe he should track her down too. Besides, you're looking at this the wrong way, Shikamaru said, leaning forward with his head resting on his arms. Sasuke's the one you need to feel sorry for. Naruto frowned as he and others turned to the lazy genin. Huh, what the hell does that mean? That was an awesome fight they had, yeah, but right now Fu's chances are miles ahead of Sasuke, Shikamaru said, tilting his head and looking back at Naruto with one eye. He's going to be kicking himself when it hits him. He made it this far and may have blown it in the first 2 minutes. Naruto blinked before crossing his arms and frowning. What the hell was he talking about? He ran through the start of the fight and couldn't see the problem. It looked like Sasuke had her with that genjutsu. A gasp drew his attention to Sakura, who had covered her mouth with her hand. Oh, Naruto turned to the pink-haired girl who'd raised a hand to her mouth at his questioning gaze. She gave him a slightly anxious look. Naruto, think about it, that genjutsu he pulled at the start was a pretty clever trick, but what did he do after that? Naruto closed his eyes and thought she obviously wasn't talking about the fight. I mean, he got put on the back foot, but once he recovered he waited, his eyes shot open. Oh, he got it now. He then grimaced. Sasuke had let his clan's power and dojutsu go to his head, slowly walked up to Fu and made to push her over to show his victory. That was definitely a Sasuke move. Given how much pride he took in his family, his eyes evolving hadn't helped there, and that's where he'd made his mistake. Fu had broken his genjutsu and turned the tables on him and had made him look bad, sure, but what he'd done there was worse. He'd slowly walked up to his opponent, sure that the battle was already over when she was still standing, leaving himself wide open. The whole time he'd ranked that sort of cockiness right up there with that stupid move he'd made in Wave when he walked into the Dome of Ice Mirrors, and while he didn't think he would if he pulled a stunt like that while leading a team of genin, Naruto brought one hand to his forehead protector. Ah man, Sasuke's going to have to show his A game for the rest of the exams just to get a shot at promotion. The next match is Shikamaru Nara versus Temari. Temari immediately unfurled her fan, kicking up a blast of wind, leaped upon it, gliding down to the arena. Oh great, and she's fired up to Shikamaru, commented Naruto. Looked at the lazy Nara, who was now gripping the railing. The lazy genin looked like he wanted to be anywhere but there right now. Shikamaru. Naruto began crossing his arms and frowning at the Nara, having already guessed what he was thinking. What do you think Ino's going to say if you forfeit? Shikamaru cringed. Sakura looked at him dully. I wouldn't want to be in your shoes if she gets a hold of you after you pull something like that. Damn it. Shikamaru hung his head in defeat. The two genin of Team 7 chuckled. What a drag, and of course I got stuck fighting a girl. Sakura frowned and put her hands on her hips. What's that supposed to mean? Shikamaru shrugged. Nothing, it just isn't classy, huh? And here I thought chivalry was for samurai. Chi-Chi commented with a raised brow. At that, Naruto turned and started to walk to the exit. Where are you going? Sakura asked to find Sasuke, and Fu, the sooner Sasuke knows he's on thin ice the better, and Fu might need a pick-me-up, you know. Fu walked out of the arena, tuning out the clamoring crowd. As she started to make her way back to the fighter's booth she lost after she put her foot down about being stuck back home all the time. After she told Shibuki she'd make a name for their village, she lost in the first round. Her brow dipped before she closed her eyes and sighed. Keep thinking positively, right? Fu may not have won, but it was a great fight. They'd both given it their all, just like she'd hoped at the start. After all the time she'd gone over how their fight could go as she'd trained, Fu didn't think she'd made any serious mistakes. She had to have impressed the crowd and the judges. Maybe they'd both become Chunin. The Hokage said you didn't have to win to pass, right? She smiled and nodded to herself as she continued on her way back to the booth. As she did, she stopped and blinked. Sasuke was standing ahead of her, leaning back against the wall with his hands in his pockets. Sasuke, Fu began in confusion. You didn't head back to the booth? Sasuke didn't say anything. Is something wrong? Fu asked, racking her mind trying to figure out what he might be upset about. Is it the match? She then smiled and waved. No hard feelings, right? She didn't get why he wouldn't be happy about their fight. He won after all, but it was the only thing that came to mind. Sasuke kicked off the wall back there at the end of the match. He began. You could have snapped those wires, isn't that right? Fu couldn't keep her eyes from widening or her mouth from dropping. How she'd only even considered that for a second. So I was right, Sasuke noted, his hand clenching at his side. He walked over to her. You had a card to play and chose not to use it. He stood a few feet away from her, looking her in the eyes with a glare. You handed me the fight. Why? What does he think? Oh boy, not good. Fu thought. In a panic she raised her hands in a placating gesture. It isn't like that, she said frantically as her mind raced. I mean, I did have one last trick up my sleeve, but it's something I had for if I fought Gaara. I'm not sure it would have even worked on you. And it wouldn't have helped at that point. She then rubbed the back of her head and looked to the ground. I was just frustrated, losing in the first round like that. I just didn't want to believe it for a minute. His eyes shifted crimson. That couldn't be good, so there's no way you could have gotten out of the wires. You didn't throw the fight because you felt sorry for me. No one put you up to take a fall for the last Uchiha. Would someone really have tried to get her to forfeit, just for that? She shook that thought aside. As she shook her head frantically, no, I'd never. His eyes narrowed. You've really got nothing to hide. Nothing. I gave it my all, just like I said. She hated lying, especially to a friend or possible friend, but it wasn't entirely untrue. The one option she did have after being captured in those wires was one she wouldn't have used even if Shibuki hadn't ordered her not to. She'd been tempted for a split second, because of just how badly she wanted to win for Shibuki, but she would never have done it. That power didn't belong to her. She refused to use it unless she really had to, especially not for something personal, and she did in fact have something up in sleeve for Gaara. Not that she'd have a chance to use it now. Please buy it. Sasuke stared at her hard. He isn't buying it, is he? I've thought there was something off about you since you met Naruto. The chance of two people so alike running into each other like that. What? Well, she guessed. She saw where he was coming from. She just clicked with Naruto, and the chances of them running into each other in the forest did seem pretty slim without factoring in the sound those snakes made. He tilted his head to the side, his eyes narrowed. Not to mention how your teammates treat you. What are you high? Am I interrupting something? A familiar voice cut, and she looked behind her with wide eyes to see a young man standing in the hall. He smiled. Hey Fu. Her expression lit up. Shibuki. Sasuke grunted and walked away with his hands in his pockets. Fu looked after him, and after a moment of fighting with herself, she said, Sasuke. He stopped and half turned to face her, his eyes still colored red. Listen, I really did do everything I could, and I know you probably don't want to hear this from me right now, but be careful against Gaara. I've heard about something like that sand power of his before. I think he's a lot more dangerous than he seems. Sasuke stood there for a second before turning and walking away. Fu sighed. She hoped their budding, maybe friendship, survived this. I see. He didn't like how the match turned out, Shibuki observed before he then shook his head and looked at the mint-haired girl. But never mind that. How are you doing after your fight? Fu froze, then plastered a smile on her face. I'm fine. I mean, I may not have done as well as I'd hoped, but I think I had a good fight. Think there's a chance I'll make Chunin her adoptive brother. Sighed Fu. He began closing his eyes. That doesn't work on me. He kneeled down and placed a hand on her shoulder. Really, how are you feeling? Fu kept up her smile for a second before her face fell a bit. The mint-haired girl looked to the nearby wall, not wanting to look at him, knowing that she'd let him down. I'm good, she said. I'm just sorry I didn't win for Taki. Shibuki smiled and shook his head. I thought that's how you'd feel. He then looked her in the eye. Listen Fu, it's true you lost. She flinched, but you shouldn't let this drag you down. You need to focus on improving, on taking the lessons that you learned here and doing better. But she began trying to ignore the stinging in her eyes. I let you down. I told you I'd remind everyone what Taki used to be, and I didn't even make it past the first round, but you made it to the finals, her leader pointed out, which is more than most can say, more so from the smaller villages. You'd be surprised how often the finals are made up solely of ninja from the big five. She looked up at him. I can't say whether you pass or not. I'm not the only judge anyway, but your opponent was a bigger deal than you think. The last scion of one of the strongest ninja clans with that legacy riding on his back. A lot of the spectators came here just to see him, and you almost won more than once, I might add. Fu looked up at him and smiled slightly, his encouragement making her heart feel lighter. And whether or not you make Chunin this time, there'll be other chances. The mint-haired girl's smile widened as her hands clasped together. Hopefully you mean you'll send me to the next exam if I don't make the cut. Shibuki nodded, and I can see that having some real experience did you good. He began closing his eyes. You did better than you did when we trained, and paid more attention than you do on your patrols. I suppose practice and simple uneventful jobs can only do so much. His expression turned serious. When we get back I'll see about assigning you a permanent sensei and sending you on missions. Fu's smile was so bright it could have lit up the whole hallway. Shibuki wasn't disappointed. She was going to be allowed on missions. Finally she'd be able to see all new sights and make lots of friends all across the nations. Her joyful laughter filled the hall as she threw herself at her brother, hugging him and burying her face in his shoulder, getting a chuckle from him as he returned her embrace. So you seemed acquainted with him. Have you managed to make some friends? Fu pulled away and nodded excitedly. Yeah, lot of them Sasuke's teammates are great. Her face fell. Then though I'm not sure where I stand with him, especially now. Shibuki nodded. Yeah, it looked like his pride had been hurt. He then stood up. Oh, and what was that warning? She jolted as he frowned in confusion. I heard about Gaara's disposition from Yoroi, but what have you heard aside from that? I got a warning about him. Shibuki arched a brow. A warning from Uchome? Her brother stiffened, his frown deepening. And what did he say? He asked her. bit of worry in his otherwise dark tone that was a source of information he did not trust at all, but she got the feeling he'd believe this. Fu hesitated for a moment, then gestured for him to get closer. He kneeled down, and she whispered Komi eyes warning in his ear. He froze and looked at her with wide eyes. He then closed them and calmed himself. I see. I can't help but feel relieved you won't be fighting him. If what I heard about his disposition is true. Fu brought a hand to her chest, looking back in the direction Sasuke walked in concern. Shibuki put a hand on her shoulder. He knows Gaara is strong, and about his thirst for blood we'll just have to hope for the best. Fu didn't say anything, still worried. Shibuki looked like he realized something. Speaking of his teammates made it to the finals with him, right? They might be worried about you. Her eyes shot open. Oh, that's right. Naruto, Sakura, and Hinata all knew Shibuki had been watching, and how much that meant to her. I better get back. She turned and ran, looking over her shoulder and waving. I'll tell you all about them later. By Shibuki. He waved after her with a smile. Shibuki sighed once she was out of sight. As usual, Fu had tried to pretend she wasn't hurt, hiding how she really felt behind her normal bubbliness. She'd pretty much always been that way, always trying to look at the brighter side of things, and it got worse after she met her birth parents. She'd been so grateful to him and his father for being there for her after that. She hadn't wanted to burden them. Their father had praised her for her positivity, but asked that she not try and hide her pain from them. Not that she'd listened. It was so hard to change her mind once she was set on something. At least she tended to come clean when he made it clear that he wasn't buying it. He frowned, then remembering how the happy-go-lucky girl had broken down in tears. After meeting them, she'd been more open about how lonely she was when he and their father wasn't around before. Not that her silence on that left him in doubt on why she'd latched onto him, saying she could have 100 friends so fervently. How he wished he could punish those two, for really didn't deserve her lot in life. Not to say that there weren't many people in the ninja world who knew more than their fair share of misfortune and sorrow. He shook his head as his thoughts turned to the end of their conversation and her warning. He didn't trust Chome, not at all, and he'd warned Fu not to listen to him on this, though he believed him. Sasuke had no idea what he was up against, but surely the proctor would stop the fight if things went too far. Sasuke looked to the ground with a frown as he made his way back to the fighter's booth. His brief interrogation of Fu had been enlightening about a lot of things. The Sharingan had many uses. Their ability to read muscle movements, for example, let him read reactions in exacting detail. Kakashi had taught him that very few could prevent small shifts in their bodies from their thoughts and feelings, no matter how good they were at deception. Fu was hiding something, but she hadn't thrown the fight intentionally. She had some trump card, but her insistence, she gave her all, and her lack of tells meant that she felt she just couldn't have used it. His pointed comments about her first meeting with Naruto had also yielded fruit. It had always seemed unlikely to him that two people would meet during the Chunin exams and have so much in common from different villages. No less, it was part of why he'd been distrustful of her. Fu's reaction when he pointed this out: shock, bewilderment, then realization. A bit hurt too, sad, but no sense of guilt, nothing to suggest that she'd been found out. She hadn't realized, and his apparent rejection hurt her. She'd been genuine the whole time. Sasuke didn't think he could be blamed for being suspicious under the circumstances, the Chunin exams being what they were, not to mention that he had past experience with people not being what they seemed. Still, he'd have to apologize to her. He supposed her concern for him was also genuine, which was nice, especially with how he'd just treated her. She knew something about Gaara, but he wasn't going to hold her silence on what was against her. They were ninja from different villages. Friends or not, they had their secrets. Sasuke heard footsteps up ahead. He looked up to see his blonde teammate walking towards him. Hey Sasuke, Naruto greeted with a wave. Naruto, the Uchiha heir, raised a brow. What are you doing here? Naruto rubbed the back of his head. Well, I thought Fu could use a pick-me-up, you know, since she just lost in front of her chief and all. Sasuke guessed he shouldn't be surprised. He would want to be there for a friend, especially with how well those two got along. He closed his eyes and pointed his thumb behind him. Well, you're a bit late on that front. Last I saw, her leader had come down to talk with her. Naruto's brows rose up. Really, huh? So that Jichi guy was right, he mused aloud before he shook his head. Anyway, that's not all. He began, only to be interrupted by more footsteps. They turned to see Shikamaru approaching. Finally got it in gear, huh? Naruto asked with a smirk. This whole thing's such a drag, the lazy Nara said, but you're right, Ino will have my ass if I don't at least give it a good try. He then looked away and rubbed the back of his neck. And probably my mom too, for that matter. That's what got him moving. Naruto chuckled. Well, good luck out there, thanks, Shikamaru said as he went on his way, waving over his shoulder. So what was the other thing? Sasuke asked, raising a brow. He frowned when Naruto grimaced. The blonde then explained what Shikamaru had pointed out about his match. The Uchiha thought about it, then clenched his eyes shut with a groan and pinched the bridge of his nose to ward off the impending headache. Sasuke had let his Sharingan's abilities go to his head and made a fool of himself in the First minute of his match he hadn't thought about how had that looked until now. He may have already cost himself his shot this time around. Great frustration rose as he contemplated how this could cost him the opportunity for more experience, how much this could slow him down. Naruto put his hand on his shoulder. Hey, you've still got 2 matches left to make up for it, right? Just show everyone you realized your mistake. Besides, at least you learned your lesson before you fought Gaara, right? He stepped back and held out a fist. You've got this, and by the end we'll all be Chunin. Sasuke scoffed, but smirked. Well, you're right about one thing. He bumped fists with the blonde, and who knows, maybe it will play out that way. Naruto grinned and put his hands behind his head. Well, I'm going to go check on food just in case. He wasn't surprised. Sasuke grunted in response, and the two went their separate ways. As he walked down the halls he put his hands in his pockets, his brow furrowed as he thought about his performance. His brother wouldn't have made that mistake. He needed to be better. It wasn't long after Naruto left Sasuke behind that he heard someone running in his direction. He soon saw a mop of green hair come into view from the staircase. Fu's orange eyes widened at the sight of him, and he stopped as she closed the distance. Naruto, she came to a stop in front of him. He smiled. Hey Fu, how's it going on? What are you doing down here? The mint-haired girl asked. Well, I thought I'd see if I could lend a hand if you were feeling down. You know, he put his hands behind his head. Sasuke said, your chief came to talk, but I wanted to make sure you were okay. Fu seemed surprised. You came to check up on me? Naruto nodded. Yep, I know how much that fight meant to you. Besides, you'd do the same for me, right? Fu's face lit up. She giggled and waved off his concern. It's okay, I wasn't happy about how things turned out, but Shibuki already helped me. She then gave him a heartfelt smile. But thanks, Naruto. Naruto grinned, but from that look and what she'd told him, he couldn't help but think he might be the first person besides Shibuki and Kyo to do something like this for her. Don't mention it, Fu. He then turned and gestured for her to follow. But come on, let's head back. Okay, the Taki Kunoichi said, and the pair began to walk back to the booth. A silence falling over them, it was broken after a few moments by Naruto, who looked back over his shoulder and asked, so Shibuki's always looking out for you? Fu nodded with a smile. Ever since he warmed up to me. She looked up at the ceiling. He's a great leader, always ready to lend a hand to anyone in the village. He even takes time to hang out with the kids around the village and give them advice. Kyo left some big shoes to fill, but Shibuki managed it. Just about everyone in Taki loves him. Sounds like the old man. Naruto noted. He told me he thinks of everyone in the village as his family, and that it's a leader's job to be the guide and pillar of support for everyone. Fu nodded. I'm not surprised to hear that. Shibuki told me he looks up to the Hokage a lot. Now it was Naruto's turn to think back, remembering all the times the third had been there for him. He may not have adopted me, but he was there for me as much as he could be. He always visited when he knew I had a bad day, spent every birthday with me, gave me advice. Not that I always listened, he added with a chuckle, and Fu's giggle told him they had that in common. He's been like a grandfather to me. You told me your old teacher looks out for you too, right? Fu asked. He looked back at her with a grin. Yep, Iruka's busy a lot, what with classes and his work under old man Hokage, but he's been like a brother to me. Fu smiled. Glad to hear it, she said before her eyes trailed away into the wall, looking somber. I feel for anyone who's really alone in the world, you know. Naruto looked down and closed his eyes, remembering the words of the masked boy back in Wave, alone in the world, desperate for anyone to be there so much. So he latched onto Zabuza and let him use him. Yeah, I know what you mean. There was a pause before Fu spoke again. Was Sasuke alone after what happened to his clan? At her words, Naruto realized they'd stopped walking. Naruto thought for a moment. Well, with how much you already know, I doubt he'd have a problem if I told you. He looked back at her. Yeah, people tried to be there for him, but he just pushed them all away. That only changed after, well, let's just say things got bad on a mission. He then frowned from what he said. I think he was too focused on avenging his family to let anyone in that, and no one could really get what he was going through. Fu gave a subdued hum in response. That was a great match you had with him, by the way. Naruto complimented her. She blinked and then smiled. Really, you think so? Naruto nodded. I hate to admit it, but Sasuke's always been number one in our group ever since the academy. I remember he never lost a single match, and that's before he learned how to use his Kekkei Genkai. He's only ever lost one fight that I can think of, and that was against someone we ran into on a mission way above our level. The blonde then looked back at her. I can't think of any time besides that anyone came as close to beating Sasuke as you did. That makes me feel a little better about losing, Fu said with a slight giggle. Naruto looked back to the ceiling. I was always trying to catch up to him back then, partly because I wanted to prove I was the best and to wipe that smug look off his face, and partly because, well, I kinda got him. I wanted to make him see me as an equal, maybe be friends. I didn't know what it was like to lose people as he did, but I knew what it was like being alone, to have no one understand what you were going through. Fu nodded. I know what you mean. She looked down at the floor. Shibuki and Kyo have always been there for me, and after I went looking for my parents, I realized just how lucky I was to have them in my life. I owe them more than I can ever say, and I try to do my best to pay them back and not be a burden, but she shook her head and ran her fingers through her hair. Sometimes when I'm alone I wish I could talk to someone who really got what it was like to have everyone else shun me the way they did, but other times I feel glad I can. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. Naruto put a hand on her shoulder and her eyes drew back up to him. Naruto closed his eyes. I know what it's like, he said quietly, and she looked at him sadly. No. Adults wanted me around when I was little, and the other kids, well, they picked up on that. Then he gave her a grin. But hey, didn't you say not to let negative thoughts get me down? All of us have people who have our backs, you and me included. His grin softened into a smile, and that's what's important, right? Fu brightened up, raising a fist in the air. You said it. He chuckled at her response. I'll always be there for my friends, however I can. Same here. Fu. He turned around. Come on, let's head back. We might miss the match at this rate. With that, they continued on their way back to the booth. The silence was broken a moment later by Fu. Naruto, he looked back at her. Thanks for the talk. It was a lot easier to talk about with someone who gets it, and it felt good to get it off my chest. Naruto smiled. Anytime, Fu. I was wondering when you'd get back, Sakura said as Naruto and Fu rejoined the group. She then smirked. Have a nice chat. Naruto chuckled as Fu answered, yep, Shibuki came by to see me first, but Naruto helped me a lot. Figured he would. Jichi commented. So what did we miss? The blonde asked as he walked up to his team. Fu walked up to the railing between them and her own teammate. Shikamaru's been running around dodging wind blasts from Temari. Sasuke answered, glancing at Naruto. Looks like he's a one-trick pony. All he's got is that shadow technique, and Temari's already seen it. He then looked down into the arena. She's smart, keeping her distance and her eyes on the shadows. She marked its length in the dirt there. Sasuke jerked his head down at her, and Naruto could see a line drawn in front of her. Naruto frowned as he took stock of the situation. Looked like Shikamaru's only option was to find a way to extend his shadow, that or use it as a distraction if he had anything else up his sleeve. Hey, Temari's got this one in the bag, Kankuro commented with a smirk. I wouldn't be too sure about that, Naruto replied. Shikamaru would probably have called it by now if he didn't have an ace in the hole. Sasuke and Sakura nodded. Sakura with a look that said that was the most obvious thing in the world, and Sasuke with his eyes closed. Hinata just looked away and poked her index fingers together. Lee blinked. Would he really give up that easily after making it this far? He's the laziest person I know, Sakura said. I can tell you from Ino's stories and some things that happened back in the forest that he's someone you can rely on when the chips are down, but otherwise he'll look for any excuse to get out of having to work. He'd definitely throw in the towel if he didn't think he could win. She then looked at the Hyuga heiress. Right, Hinata? I'd rather not say, Hinata replied. Whatever, you keep thinking like that, but my sister's got this one, Kankuro replied. Naruto did a brief double take at that before looking back at the arena waiting for Shikamaru to make his move, and he waited and waited about half an hour. Naruto's eye twitched. Yeesh, this is taking forever. Not like either of them have a choice, Sakura commented. Yeah, Naruto waved her off. She can't see where he is. He's only got one move and neither of them can get close. I get it, moving too fast could get you killed out in the field, so let them take their time. I don't have a problem with it. It's just boring. True, Sakura admitted. Then she looked up at the crowd. That said, a lot of people in the crowd aren't a ninja. They might start throwing things. If this drags on much longer, I think you may be right, Lee said. Looking up into the crowd, they could hear people starting to mutter, HN, like you said. Those people aren't a ninja. They don't get it. This can mean the difference between life and death. Let them mutter, Sasuke said. Finally something happened. Shikamaru's shadow shot out and sped past the line. Temari panicked and kicked back, moving left and right to make it extend as far as possible before it stopped. What the? He then looked up. Oh, I get it. He was waiting for the sun to go down, so he did have a plan. Sakura began looking up at the sky before frowning. Wait, what's that? There was something in the air. It was Shikamaru's jacket tied to a kunai, casting a shadow onto as it extended further, forcing Temari back once again. Once again she stayed out of range and the shadow pulled back. Then 5 kunai flew out of the brush along the edge of the arena, each bearing an explosive tag. They exploded across the arena, kicking up dirt and debris. Temari shielded her face and then looked around wildly. She caught the shadow moving in behind her just in time and kicked back right as Shikamaru charged out from the cloud behind her. She blocked his punch with her fan, and then they stopped and jumped apart and their shadows stayed connected. What? Kankuro gripped the railing. He got her way to go. Shikamaru. Naruto cheered. Hoo, good thinking down there. Fu yelled down at him. So all that was a distraction, Sasuke mused. Welp, he's got her. What's he going to do now? Jichi wondered. Shikamaru raised his right arm. Temari forced to mirror his action and then said clearly, I forfeit. Naruto froze. He blinked once, then again. Then what did he just? Fu said, stunned by disbelief. She stared down into the arena, eyes wide and mouth agape. Everyone except for Gaara shared that reaction. The crowd too. A few moments passed and then the clamoring started in the stands above. Yep, that's Shikamaru for you, Sakura said, staring down at the arena dully.